link in the chat with if you don't know what neighborhood you live in. And I'd also like to start this evening with an Indigenous land acknowledgement. Before we begin, let us acknowledge we gather on the original homelands of the Dakota people who were forcibly removed from and are still connected to this territory. We honor with gratitude the land and our stewardship of it. And as a reminder, we are recording this meeting tonight. So I have some quick Microsoft Teams tips. Again, write your name and neighborhood in the chat box so that we know who's here. Keep yourself muted until it's your turn to speak. If you're getting delays or freezing and any type of glitching while you're watching video, try turning off your video. When it's time, we'll ask you to put your name in the chat box or use the raise your hand function if you'd like to speak. So a little bit about tonight's meeting. We ask that you please be patient as we navigate technology. I know everybody's more familiar with using technology, but sometimes technology doesn't always agree with what we're trying to do. So just be patient if we run into some issues. Again, please stay muted and we can mute you if we need to. We're asking that one person speaks at a time. If you want to speak, you can type your name in the chat or use the raise your hand function and we'll call on you. You can type your comments in the chat box as well if you rather not speak. And we ask that everyone be respectful of one another. We will remove anyone from the meeting who uses derogatory language or says or does anything inappropriate or abusive. So for tonight's agenda, we're going to do a project background. We're going to hear about the preliminary foundings from Wilder Research Team. We're also going to get a police perspective from Deputy Chief Bruley. We'll talk about next steps with City Council, and then it'll be your turn to talk and when we have conversation, and then we'll close out. Next, we'll hear from City Assistant Manager Woki Freeman Boba. Woki? Woki, sorry, you're muted.
Good evening. I tried to unmute myself. Good evening, everyone. My name is Woki Freeman Boba, and I am the Assistant City Manager for the City of Brooklyn Park. Thank you all for being here this evening. This evening, I wanted to give a bit of a background for how we came to where we are today. So as we know, many communities around the U.S. are really taking a look at policing generally, and much of this started after the tragic death of George Floyd. What we had was, after that took place, our Human Rights Commission sent a statement to the City Council of Brooklyn Park, really expressing a concern that this had happened, broadly in Minnesota, and that they expressed an interest to partner with the City Council and partner with the Brooklyn Park Police Department to evaluate our policies, practices, and procedures. And so at a June work session, the City Council invited the Human Rights Commission and the Brooklyn Park Police Department's Multicultural Advisory Committee, which is the MAC, to develop a plan to review Brooklyn Park Police Department policies, practices, and procedures, and to make recommendations. Then in July and August, the City Council hosted a number of listening sessions on police reform and racial justice to get feedback from the community. And those were facilitated by the Human Rights Commission as well. In the months of July through October of 2020, the HRC and MAC spent some time working on a work plan that they presented to the City Council and received some feedback. Following that, in October of, next please, in October of 2020, there was a request for proposals to have a third-party organization or agency do an evaluation and assessment of our Brooklyn Park Police Department. And there were 3 areas of focus that were included in this request for proposals. One, the evaluators were asked to conduct an analysis of our Brooklyn Park Police Department using research-based standards for criminal justice reform to identify areas where the department is performing well and areas for improvement, especially with regards to our residents of color. They were also asked to develop a data-based scorecard and recommendations for continuous improvement. The second area of focus was to conduct an analysis of other City of Brooklyn Park community metrics and outcomes related to systemic inequities within the city and their connection or their impact on public safety, including their impact on the legitimacy and relevance of law enforcement. And then the third area of focus was to conduct an analysis of likely root causes of violence in Brooklyn Park to address them holistically as a community. And from that request for proposals, the city selected Wilder Research to conduct that research, and that brings us to today. And next, I will hand things over to XP Lee and Kathy Fraser, who will speak a little bit more about that process.
Hello and good evening, everyone. Thanks again for coming out. My name is Kathy Fraser, and I was part of both the advisory committee as well as the evaluation subcommittee. I'm also part of the multicultural advisory group, and I do serve on the Community Long Range Planning Commission. So just a little background on the committees. The advisory committee was more of a high-level group focused on the what. We met monthly, received progress reports, and the evaluation subcommittee was really focused on the detail level, focused on the how we go about things. So some of the things that we provided input on included the recruitment process, so recruiting residents to participate in the interview. We provided feedback on the interview process as well as the scorecard as well. So I will hand it off to XP to introduce himself and add some more to what I just said.
Hello, everyone. Good evening. My name is XP Lee. I was on the evaluation committee as well as the advisory subcommittee. I also sit on the city's planning commission and used to work for the city as a community liaison. Yeah, just to kind of add a little bit of context to what Kathy has already said, it was, you saw some of the names or all the names on that previous slide. I mean, we really had really good conversation all throughout in terms of the direction of the work, really getting into some of the nitty-gritty details around the structure of the questions, of the process, of the interview, also sections of the scorecard. We really checked in with each other, as well as obviously the Wilder and our officers. So yeah, we really felt like it was definitely a really great team effort to be able to get us to this point over the last few months here. So thank you for joining us tonight to kind of go over this. And to go into more detail, I'll hand it off to our partners from Wilder.
Before we jump to Wilder, we've gotten so many more folks to join us. If the folks that haven't put their name and neighborhood in the chat, if you could do that at this time, that would be great. Thank you.
Thanks, XP and Kathy, and thanks, Claudia. Hi, everyone. My name is Julie Atella. I work at Wilder Research. I'm here with my colleagues, Lindsay Turner, Wendy Huckabee, and Sofak Mom, who are here. Lindsay and I wanted to talk, give a high-level overview of our project. If you go to the next slide. So today we are going to cover just an overview of the purpose of the study. We're going to give you more details about what Kathy and XP just talked about, some of the methods that we used. And then we will share with you some emerging themes, as well as an overview of the scorecard that we created. We want to make sure we talk a little bit about the limitations of the study, and then end with some considerations for Brooklyn Park. And I'll just mention that we have time, since there's time on the agenda to talk about your feedback. We will just be going through this. So if you can, write your questions down, or however you want to do that, that's great. We're just going to go through these slides. So as Wilkie mentioned, the purpose of the study was to understand the root causes of violence in Brooklyn Park, as well as develop recommendations for improving community safety, and then ultimately creating a scorecard that Brooklyn Park Police Department can assess how their work's doing in a transparent way with people from the community. Next slide, please. In order to do that, we employed a lot of different mixed methods approach to address the study's questions. And that included reviewing dozens of reports, looking at different data and different community-based indicators, conducting interviews with people who have had not only experience with interactions with the police, but some city employees, including some people from law enforcement. And then we also, as you heard about, were able to, and so are so grateful for having our advisory committee and subcommittee that helped guide some of the work. And next slide, please. So I'm going to hand it off to Lindsay, and she's going to go over some of the emerging themes that came from doing the interviews and looking at the data and all the other things that we have done. Lindsay?
Thanks so much for all of that. Yeah, so we'll just start right at the beginning. That first area of focus was really to investigate what root causes of violence there might be in Brooklyn Park. And we first kind of honed in on research that describes risk and protective factors for community violence in communities, diverse communities around the globe, but really to pick out what those common conditions are where we know people experience safety and low crime rates, or risks of violence and disorder. And really broadly speaking, what the research shows is that there's a risk of violence when people are not economically secure or connected to the community. Go to the next slide, please. Just a little bit more from this research. Again, just super broadly speaking, safe communities tend to be communities where people have what they need. They're economically stable, their cost of living is achievable, they're connected with their neighbors, they're positively served by systems like education and healthcare, things like that. The research also shows that community level data can illuminate or show where people have what they need. We can look at things like census surveys and other community level pieces of data to understand where risk factors and protective factors are more or less present. And research and our experience also shows that systemic marginalization, systemic racism are going to contribute and do contribute to the unequal presence of risk factors across communities. Yep, and then that next slide. So with that broad understanding, we then turned our attention to see where those root causes of violence are more or less present across races and places in Brooklyn Park. We pulled and analyzed 18 community indicators to see where disparities might be present or not. We also interviewed 50 adults who either live in Brooklyn Park or work for the city in some capacity. And those interviews included questions about where these people or where our interviewees saw the social conditions present or lacking, and asked them about their experiences with services and supports to boost those economic stability or positive connections. And through all that, we found disparities in Brooklyn Park that likely contribute to violence and disorder. And that next slide, please. Thank you. So this is an example piece of community data. I'm sorry, it's my eyes can't read that anymore if they ever could. But what we're looking at here are home ownership rates. That chart is about comparing home ownership rate by race in Brooklyn Park, and the map is comparing it across census tracts. And first on the chart, the orange bar, the very top one, is the rate of home ownership in Brooklyn Park overall. I appreciate that, thank you. And then the next bar down, that first blue bar, says that 87% of white residents of Brooklyn Park live in homes that they own. And then the next two bars show us that that's compared to 41% of Black residents of Brooklyn Park and 39% of American Indian or Native residents of Brooklyn Park who live in homes that they own. And then in that map, we can see the greater the blue saturation, the greater the percentage of people who live in that area who live in homes they own. And so probably no surprise to anybody here, but along the north and the river corridor, the vast majority of people live in homes that they own, and then where it's less saturated, kind of down that central south corridor, we get down to like 20% or 22%, I think, of people who live in that area live in homes that they own. Thanks for the zooms. That was a great help. So next slide, please. And then synthesizing that with information that we found in the interviews, interviewees were in agreement. They reported that they did see these two Brooklyn parks where there are disparities across races and places. We asked interviewees, especially if they had any experiences with services or supports in Brooklyn Park that are aimed at boosting economic stability or cultivating those positive connections that we know can lead to increased safety. Didn't get a lot of people who had experience with the economic services and support side of things, but did get a lot of people who reported positive experiences with youth engagement initiatives and neighborhood connection initiatives in Brooklyn Park. Go to the next slide, please. And so that second area of focus for us was to make research-based recommendations to improve community safety. And to do this, we first looked at research on connections between police practices and the size of police force and things like that, and crime rates in communities. And then we also looked at sources in order to understand police practices and their impacts. With that, we were able to identify police best practices. We also looked at Brooklyn Park Police Department open data and had a number of conversations with stakeholders in the Brooklyn Park Police Department, and also talked to these 50 interviewees about, to ask them about their experiences with and their perceptions of the Brooklyn Park Police Department. And really a key finding from the literature is kind of a limit. Improving policing might not improve public safety. And I'll explain a little bit more on the next slide. Yeah, thank you. So key message from the research backs up that old saying that we cannot arrest our way to safety. And I'm going to kind of pause on that concept and dive a little bit into specifics. Research shows that crime rates are not related to the number of officers on a force or to a lot of policing practices like strict policing of low-level crime, like property damage or illegal substance use. Research also shows that a lot of what we think about as kind of traditional police work, which is investigating whether a crime occurred and who might have done it, and then the culmination of that investigation is an arrest and referrals for criminal charges, all that sort of stuff. Those arrests, the criminal charges, incarceration or detention can be less effective. Sorry, I got it. Less effective at addressing the root causes of violence and disorder than alternatives, including community-based crisis responses, treatment and restorative justice interventions. And arrests and detention and criminal charging all can cause harm to individuals, families, and communities that risk future violence and disorder. Research also shows that there are changes that police can undergo that will result in them using less force against community members and them being more accountable to community members. And these sorts of things can reduce both police use of force and the risk that police kill people, and also impact reduce community violence. But a lot of other changes to traditional policing, the research isn't there, or shows that these changes might have just really limited or no effects on community safety. We did, though, in our analysis of research on policing practices, we were able to identify 5 key practices that are related to outcomes. That first one, consent-based searches, we should actually probably have that be in where we, let me think about how to say this, informed consent required for consent-based searches is a policing best practice. A focus and lots of skills in de-escalation has a connection to reduced use of force, and indirect research connection to less community violence. Where officers are required to identify themselves, whether or not somebody asks for it, but just very proactively, hi, I'm officer so-and-so, here's my card, here's my badge number. That's related to officers using less use of force, less verbal intimidation, increased accountability. Procedural justice is this idea that everybody's treating people with dignity and respect. People feel like what they want to say has been heard by people in positions of authority. Where police departments really grab onto procedural justice and are skilled with that, there is increased community trust in the department. And then there's key provisions that are sometimes present in union contracts or other laws like Police Bill of Rights that govern police conduct, that are where those provisions are present, it is related to increased police use of force and increased risk that police kill community members. So contract provisions that limit oversight, that limit discipline, that erase misconduct records, that allow officers the opportunity to review the evidence against them before they give a statement in regards to like an allegation of misuse of force or something like that. Those are all contract provisions that can be related with undesirable outcomes. And so through this analysis of policing best practices and then looking at the Brooklyn Park Police Department policy manual, having lots of conversations with Brooklyn Park Police Department officers, we were able to identify some key strengths and some areas for improvement that are based in the research. One of the key strengths, I think, is just really the transparency and the responsivity that we've experienced throughout the research process. And in creating the scorecard, which has dozens and dozens of metrics, the Brooklyn Park Police Department has robust data collection that they engage in, and they really are practiced at using that data to drive better practices for themselves. And really just this attitude of wanting to try new things in order to better serve the community. Key opportunities to improve the consent-based searches. Their policy manual does allow for consent-based searches when there's not the really strict informed consent requirements, which is associated with some negative outcomes. Officer identification is required, but only if somebody requests it first. And Minnesota law does impose some of those key limits on police accountability. And so that's not necessarily a mechanism for the Brooklyn Park Police Department to change, but it would be wonderful if they could throw their voice in to changing that law. And so next slide, please. So we talked a lot about what we found in the research and kind of the analysis of key policies and practices of the Brooklyn Park Police Department. We also talked to all 50 interviewees and asked them for their perceptions of Brooklyn Park Police Department around these 4 areas of accountability, de-escalation, effectiveness, and procedural justice. And more interviewees had positive perceptions of accountability for the Brooklyn Park Police Department than negative. There were equal number of interviewees who had positive or negative perceptions of de-escalation and procedural justice. And more interviewees than had negative perceptions of effectiveness than positive perceptions. And we also, in our interviewee selection process, we're pretty intentional about inviting community members to interview if they had had close experience with the Brooklyn Park Police Department in recent years. We ended up interviewing 29 people who had had this close experience. And they raised themes, again, of de-escalation and procedural justice. When the people had close experience with the Brooklyn Park Police Department, they identified improving skills in de-escalation as an area for improvement for the department. And people with close experience with the Brooklyn Park Police Department, more people than not thought that they were treated fairly and in accordance with these procedural justice principles. We lost the slides again, which is okay. And they're back, and with the next slide, please, I will pass it to Julie to give an overview of the scorecard.
Thank you, Lindsay. Yeah, you can go to the next slide. Just an overview of what the scorecard is going to look like. So for those of us that like to see some or have some logistics of how things work, there's a report and a larger report that will be released in the next couple of weeks, and additionally a scorecard that supplements that. And the scorecard is set up somewhat as a workbook, and in that scorecard there are 10 goals that are mentioned, and the 10 goals are really around law enforcement policies, training, transparency, community oversight, commitment to standards, officer wellness and safety, community policing, data-driven management, quality services, and overall safety. And so those 10 goals were with indicators in each goal were based on the literature review and the themes from the interview, and also the guidance from our advisory group and the HRC work plan. Really the scorecard is something that Brooklyn Park, the city of Brooklyn Park, is to determine how they want to do it. Some of these indicators are going to be available more often than annually, and some less often than annually. So as the scorecard is reviewed, the Brooklyn Park team can and community residents who are part of it are able to decide how they want to tackle each goal. We recommend having a team of 10 or so people, and then team members will be charged with determining, different sources of where to get data. For instance, using the law enforcement police policy manual, or there's also other parts to look at, some community-based data links that are available, union contracts, that sort of thing. And they will come up with individual scores, and then kind of come together to talk about where does the group that has done the scoring really feel that the score is, and what the next steps are. And as an example, if we go to the next slide, you'll see, and again, sorry for this being really small, but it's set up where there's a scoring scale for each goal. So right now we're looking at goal 2, which is training and education. And as you can see, there's instructions. There's things about what resources the people who are looking at this goal may want to review, training manuals, different hours of, what required hours are for training, the process that we're holding officers accountable for following those trainings, and then other sources. The gray boxes just indicate that it's a fillable form. So for those people that have terrible handwriting like myself and prefer to just type things in, it will be available in that way. And then for those of us that like to just write things in, there's also that option. And then there's just the different indicators. And there's, as Lindsay mentioned a moment ago, there's these indicators for this goal that include, everybody that's working on this goal to look at use of force data, and then using the scoring range on the scoring scale on the left, they can decide whether they think it's a 1 to 5. And again, on the last part, there's some discussion questions and kind of next steps about how to do that, and when to review it again will be on the final page or the next step section of this scorecard workbook. So we're finalizing that, and it will be rolled out very soon. But that was just a kind of an overview of what the scorecard looks like based on one of the goals. And yeah, each goal is set up with a list of indicators, a scoring range, and information about where the sources can be found or what type of sources to look for. And next slide, please. So what I wanted to mention before we get into some of the lessons learned is that given everything that we just gave you a lot of detailed information and this project lasted 6 months, and quite honestly, it was very intensive and extensive for a short period of time. So what we just shared with you, this comes from 6 months and about 100 pages worth of information that you could read very soon. But there are limitations of the study, and the 4 things we really wanted to point out was that the key informant interviews, because they are they don't necessarily reflect the perspectives of all city employees or all residents. So this is not a representative study, and it wasn't intended to be. But the themes that emerged out of that, we can talk about it as themes from interviewees, but we wouldn't want to. We don't frame it as this is a reflective of all perspectives of residents. Also, this might be obvious to some of us that have looked at different data and things in our lives, but even just really important to say that we have a lot of metrics and different types of studies and things to look at, and not everything that was available was analyzed, and that has a lot to do with the timeline, and also there's the scope of what we were asked to look at. And also our advisory group really helped us narrow down the really important metrics that were that they felt that was important as residents to focus on. So that was really helpful, but it is a limitation of the study that we didn't look at everything. And another thing that's important to point out is that there's some of this information and some of the studies are new, given the way that things are being looked at right now, and different programs are emerging and different approaches to policing and just transparency among communities. And so the research is sort of new, and therefore there's gaps. And so it's not always possible to connect what police practices lead to the desired outcomes of like safety and such. And so we're kind of unfortunately, in some ways in an infancy state in some of this, and there's just not enough information, or there's gaps in the studies. And we just have to realize that we don't know everything yet. And another thing about the metrics is that the scorecard has indicators in there, but they aren't necessarily all the indicators that Brooklyn Park may ever want to look at, nor are they all the same in terms of, some might be more important to residents and to the city staff than others are. And so we have a mechanism of highlighting the ones that have emerged in some of the literature and some of the other things, but we also know that we can't determine for you which ones are the most important. And so that's hopefully what the nice part about the workbook is that you as a team get to decide some of these things, not only how often you're going to look at them, but also which ones are the most important, knowing that you won't be able to change every single indicator every year. So, and you might not need to, because some of them might score very high, and that you'll know that those are one of the things that you might not need to look at as often. So that's what I wanted to mention really briefly about the limitations. You can go to the next slide. And I'll hand it back to Lindsay for the final thoughts.
Thanks, Julie. Next slide, please. Yeah, so kind of bringing it back to those areas of focus and really making the research driven recommendations for improving community safety and policing in Brooklyn Park. Key to all of this from the research and from what we heard from the interviews is a heavy focus on prevention. Some key steps to that would be engaging community members, especially those who are disproportionately disadvantaged by those disparities that we talked about earlier, to identify priorities to fill gaps so that people can achieve economic stability, so that people feel connected to their neighbors and positively connected to the community. Addressing inequities is positive in and of itself and an additional contributor to public safety, as research shows that big gaps in wealth and economic standing, big gaps in a community can also be a driver for violence. So if there's a good focus on prevention and making sure that the social conditions where safety thrives are really built and fostered in communities that have traditionally, or not traditionally, but that have historically been left behind, closing those gaps is an additional boost to community safety. We're recommending increasing access to and availability of social and emotional supports. So if there's any programming that gets expanded that's about economic stability, the impact on safety will be even greater if there's some amount of wraparound services or referrals, or just approach to those services and supports in a way that addresses social and emotional needs of the people who are accessing them, because increased mental health and increased connections equal increased safety. Improving the built environment or the physical environment can also have good effects on decreasing violence and disorder. People have maybe heard about like cleaning and greening initiatives where vacant lots are turned into temporary community gardens, or other improvements are like making sure that parks have park and rec centers that are activity generators so that people are really drawn to the parks to use them and make those connections and foster that sense of community. A second recommendation is to improve the interventions. One mechanism to do this is to assess the Brooklyn Park Police Department for improvements using our scorecard. Definitely recommend that gets used in partnership with community members who are impacted by the systemic marginalization and police contact. Other ways to improve interventions are kind of part of what Julie was alluding to earlier, some of these emerging ideas about reimagining policing. Some have pretty sound basis in the research. That includes using community-based mental health responders for mental health crises. Those have decades of good results in other cities. Other interventions could be using school-based safety workers instead of police officers in schools where Brooklyn Park youth attend, and other efforts to reimagine police responsibilities. We also took a look at a couple of interventions called focused deterrence and restorative justice, and you can read more about it. I'm keeping an eye on the time. So you can read more about that in the report, or I'm happy to answer questions about it. But we recommend a number of avenues to improve interventions. And throughout this all, as priorities, you know, we live with the reality of limited funds and resources, really to be strategic and planful about where efforts to improve community safety in Brooklyn Park get a lot of funding, remembering that there are limits to improving policing on increasing safety. So that does it for me and my slides. Thanks.
Thank you so much, Lindsay and Julie, excuse me. I would like to recognize that we have joining us tonight, Mayor Pro Tem West Hafner, Councilmember Pa, Councilmember Parks, and Councilmember Jacobson, who will be sharing a few words with us in a moment.
Good evening, everybody. My name is Deputy Chief Mark Bruley, the Brooklyn Park Police Department. I oversee our investigative division, and I'm also the PIO for the police department. I was asked just to give a few words about our perspective along the way. We've had numerous people kind of question us, both sides of how we felt about this, so I think it's important to get our point of view out there. Originally, when this conversation started, there was a lot of conversations around defunding the police or reforming the police, and then nobody really knew what that meant. I think it inherently kind of gave us and others anxiety of the unknown. And so we were actually really happy to see when the city elected to reach outside the city to have kind of impartial people to come in and take a look and do really two things. And the scorecard we're very supportive of, because one thing I'm very proud about this police department, and it is really ingrained in who we are, and that is continuous improvement. We've always tried to bring the best police department to serve the community, and to do that, we've always trying to change and meet the needs. And we only know what we know. So it was really good for us to see that some sort of scorecard or assessment tool is going to be used to find out both the things that we're doing really well that we don't want to stop doing, and identify the places where we're not doing so well and things that we can do better. And we were really happy to see that. The other thing that we were really happy to see is some conversations around the violent crime, because it's never been more important than it is now. Unfortunately, violent crime has been the Achilles heel of the city of Brooklyn Park. And that trend, unfortunately, is at an all-time high right now. So the focused attention on violent crime and alternative strategies to resolve it are absolutely welcomed. And that is all I have.
Next, we'll hear for some next steps.
I believe that's me, correct?
Yes, sorry, Councilmember Jacobson, yes.
All right. Well, I want to start off by thanking everybody for being here tonight to hear about this important work. I want to thank the committee for many, many hours spent on this project. I want to thank the team at Wilder, and I want to thank our police department and other city staff that participated. I think that we're lucky in Brooklyn Park that we have a police department that, as Deputy Chief Bruley said, they wanted to do this process. They want to be part of this conversation. They want to be transparent. As the trend in violent crime has increased in our community, and we think about alternative ways to deal with that, it's never been more important than now to look at the root causes and to identify, are we doing things within our city the way that we should be? We also are not starting out at zero, because we did create a mental health unit. Is it what it should be? Probably not, but we have something to start with. We've been doing community policing for many years. Is it what it should be? Probably not, but this is our opportunity to look at this work through this continuous improvement lens. I believe it's important that we use the scorecard not just as a dashboard to keep track of the things that we're doing, but as something that can drive our work. And we have a police department that's open to doing that. And so I believe we as a community will benefit from all of this across the board. As far as what are next steps for the council, we have not seen the full report. And so we will get that on July 12th. And then there will be a council work session that is preliminarily scheduled right now for July 19th to discuss the report in more detail, and then really to dive into next steps as we look at budgets and things like that, and figuring out what we're going to do. And I think community engagement is something we in Brooklyn Park are really good at, and we will continue to do that along the way, obviously, as it relates to this. So thank you.
Thank you, Councilmember Jacobson. Next, we'll hear from you, and I'll pass it on to lead us in discussion.
All right, so now it's your turn. You've heard a lot tonight, so we want to get a sense for, how you are reacting to what you just heard. We do have 4 questions that we will ask you tonight. So you can raise your hands and we'll call upon you, or you can feel free to type your responses in the chat. We'll make sure to call on the folks on the phone first, since they are not able to respond via chat or by raising their hands. And then we ask that you please keep your comments brief, because we would like to hear from as many people as possible. So we'll start with the first question. So based on what you've heard tonight, what were you glad to see covered in the report?
I'll jump in here and also say there will be a link in the chat to a form that folks can fill out with these questions on it if they would like it captured. Feel free to put your responses in the chat or raise your hand. Thank you.
I see that Councilmember Parks has his hand raised.
Councilmember Parks?
Yep, I do have my hand raised. I've been listening to the process, and I was the one thing I'm really glad to hear from Deputy Chief Bruley is that they're accepting and agreeing in this process, because I've been frustrated with just what I'm hearing. I came from a fire family, fire service for 44 years. And what my frustration was is that if a firefighter, and I've said this before, if a firefighter gets in trouble, we hold that firefighter accountable. But it seems what happens nationwide is that if a police officer does something wrong, every police officer nationwide is held accountable. And that part just frustrates me. I don't understand it. I'm glad to hear that we're going through the process still. I'm glad to hear that the police department and most of the city council are on board with this. I still have a lot to learn on it. So my initial gut reaction was, it's just frustrating. I just want to make sure that I know that the residents are going to be okay, because we're tough enough to be okay. I just want to also make sure that our police officers are okay, that we're not chasing people out. So those are the things I got out of the conversation. But I was really happy to hear Deputy Chief Bruley say that they're agreeing with this. So I just wanted to get my word out. So thank you.
Thank you, Councilmember Parks.
XP?
Yeah, no, I just wanted to maybe if Deputy Chief Bruley is still on, he can maybe respond to Councilmember Parks's comments, but also there's a question from Yolanda about Brooklyn Park officers dealing with residents that are not economically or socially challenged, and what actions will the department execute to ensure all persons are treated fairly?
The first one is regarding Councilmember Parks. Yeah, I appreciate the comments. Yeah, I'm very proud. I mean, I've worked here for over 26 years. And again, one of the greatest things about this police department is how progressive we are and how everybody works towards the goal of being the best police department we can. And we understand that means change and evolving and being progressive and finding new ways to do business to meet the needs of our community. And like Councilmember Jacobson said, are we always spot on? No. And I think if we ever get to the point where we think we've done it or done it well enough, then we're cheating our community, to be honest with you, because we should always be trying to strive to do better and find ways to meet the needs, because the community's needs change and we need to be nimble to be able to meet those. So the way this was done, in our opinion, with research-based and with community voice, with the police department sitting at the table of these groups and providing information and being part of the process, I thought it was handled exceptionally well, and I think everybody will be served well for it. The second question was out there, and I think it was around treating people who are of lower economic, social or economic status in our community fairly. That's in our policy. That's ingrained in everything we do. And we have strong policies and procedures to make sure that's done. So it's hard for me to answer that in the context, because I'm sure it's referencing a specific incident, but we demand that everybody be treated fairly and with due process. And if not, our officers are held accountable, and we have a long track record of showing that, which includes our policy that we investigate every complaint that comes into this police department. And it doesn't mean if it even sounds fictitious or if it comes from somebody who may be suffering from mental illness and maybe we know that they're hallucinating, it still is documented, it still is investigated, and they still get a written notice of the outcome of that investigation. So long history of making sure our staff being held accountable, especially when treating people fairly, it's very important to us. So I hope that answered part of it.
Thank you. Do we have anyone on the phone that would like to comment or ask a question? All right.
If there's no takers on the phone, I see Stephen Marcelike. Forgive me if I said that name wrong, but I see that his hand is up.
No, you did a good name. It's close enough. I have one question, and I sent it in when the requests originally went out. The city spent roughly $50,000 with the Wilder Group. Under your limitations today, you say key informant interviews do not reflect the perspective of all city employees or the residents. After going to 3 of the listening sessions, and I know there were more than 50 people that attended those, how did you weight the listening sessions against your 50 people that you interviewed? Thank you.
I appreciate the question, Stephen. Thank you. The listening sessions that took place over the summer, we have looked at the themes that arose from those listening sessions, but since they weren't conducted by us and didn't ask the same questions, and people who were present at the listening sessions didn't have the opportunity to weigh in on the things that we were asking them, we didn't synthesize the responses from the listening sessions into the report. Those listening sessions did form a lot of the basis of our methods, however, because what we heard from our city partners was that very likely people, white people and older people from Brooklyn Park might have been overrepresented in those listening sessions. And so we were, the city was very interested in hearing from people who are more likely to have had contact with the Brooklyn Park Police Department and people and reach people that just didn't seem to have been reached by the listening sessions. And so we were trying to balance the methods that we use to invite people to participate in these interviews and the people who actually ended up getting an invite to participate in the interviews against kind of the demographics of the folks who were reached by the listening sessions. And so that's kind of on like the who participated in our interviews versus the listening sessions side of the equation. And then as far as the questions that we asked in our interviews, we developed those questions based in the research that we did on the social conditions for public safety and on these key aspects of policing in Brooklyn Park, and on a couple of interventions that come up time again in the literature as being good ways to intervene in violence, to restore safety and healing for survivors. And so our questions were a lot more focused, a lot more based in the research, and a lot kind of less general or broad than the ones that were asked in the listening sessions. And so since it was really kind of an apples to oranges situation, we did not synthesize the listening question or the listening session findings with the findings of the 50 interviews that we did for this.
So then just to clarify, you did not take the residents of Brooklyn Park's feedback at all, other than 50 of them, correct?
No, that's absolutely incorrect. We, working based on the research, developed an interview protocol, and working in partnership with our city, with our advisory committee and evaluation subcommittee, we interviewed in a span of 5.5 weeks, 50 people who live in Brooklyn Park. Interviews were about 75 minutes long. And then we analyzed those interviews and synthesized those with our analysis of community indicators in Brooklyn Park. which
Okay,
also included community data from the biennial survey that was last conducted in 2019 that I believe did reach a representative sample of people.
Okay, 50 out of a population of 80,000 does not seem like a very fair percentage, but thank you.
Sure, and I could just jump in and say, in a lot of our studies, it's impossible to do a representative study. A key informant interview approach for qualitative analysis is one that's that we felt strongly with, and that we felt was within the parameters of what we were asked to do. And as Lindsay mentioned, since there already was the survey that was done in the 2019 survey that was representative, we didn't feel, I mean, it wasn't really part of what we thought was necessary because we had a voice in that way. So again, I think given some of the parameters of what we had, but also it's not that this is a method that we employ in many studies, because it is impossible to get a representative study. It would have been a completely different project. Not one that isn't necessary. I'm not saying that, it just wasn't what we were charged with the scope of this project.
So then either the city wasted $50,000 with you, or we wasted how much time of the city's money going back to having the 3 listening sessions.
So
That's enough. We beat that one. Go on to somebody else, please.
Hello, thank you. Thank you. I do have a couple of other responses to the first question that came in through our link that we put into the chat. Eric, if you could throw that chat in the chat box again. The question is, what were you glad to see covered in the report or presentation? And I have a response that says, I'm glad that the report provided comprehensive data after conversations with community members. There's also another comment or response to that first question. The fact that people are noticed how bad the BCOP group is being treated. I think that's BPOC group is being treated, and officers are finally getting held accountable. So those are the 2 comments that I have from the link for that first question. If you'd like to move on to the second.
Sure. Thank you, Claudia. There's a question already in terms of, well, maybe more of a statement from Peggy. Her initial gut reaction, it really consists of questions. When Wilder says the research, the data, et cetera, says what it says, which data specifically informed their work, national, regional, BP, and she also questions, the interviews and the percentage of the interviewees. So, maybe if Lindsay or Julie could talk a little bit more about the data sets that you had looked into.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks so much. So we looked at research. A lot of it is coming from various communities across the United States. With regards to the community data and what that says about conditions for violence and conditions for safety in Brooklyn Park, we looked specifically for research from diverse and kind of like similarly sized cities that connected social conditions to safety. And so we weren't able to use a study from Brooklyn Park about what are the conditions for safety in Brooklyn Park, because no such study exists. But we were able to find robust research consensus from studies around the United States and around the world that communities that are safe communities have these things in common, and communities where there's a higher risk of violence have these things in common. And then pull from those studies what types of community data we need to look at in order to understand where those conditions are present or absent in Brooklyn Park. And then we looked at Brooklyn Park data. We looked at your survey, like your census surveys and your community surveys in Brooklyn Park. And as far as police best practices and policing practices generally, all of that research there's a worldwide police scorecard that we looked at, but the rest of it was research from areas around the United States, and there's not anything specific. We did not find any study that said that the Brooklyn Park Police Department, if they do these things, would have good outcomes, and so we weren't able to pull from a Brooklyn Park specific study for that.
Thank you for that. I do have some responses from the form for initial reactions. I'd like to see a bigger and more comprehensive study. Someone else said, my first thought was what community members were interviewed, were participants from various backgrounds interviewed, what are the next steps? Someone else says it's been long overdue. Another person says it does not say enough about the community activities or officers are involved. Our officers are involved. Those are all that I have from the form.
Thank you, Claudia. Would anybody else like to share their gut reactions, I guess is the term we're looking for here? Anybody on the phone?
There are some comments in the chat, and unfortunately, all of the chats are coming in on top of the chat, so I can't read them. Let me move my screen. I'm thankful to any and every BIPOC on this call and in this community who are brave enough to hold PDs accountable in spaces such as this, especially in conversations surrounding public safety. The amount of people vocally thanking and supporting the police can make a space feel very unsafe and unwelcoming. I am thankful for the time. My screen jumped, sorry. I'm thankful for the time and emotional labor that Brooklyn Park BIPOC gave to this survey and this meeting.
And if I can just pipe up, I'm seeing a couple of questions further up in the chat, and I want to make sure that I'm explaining myself really well. Questions about like, how does a national study help Brooklyn Park, and how this research applies here. And I just want to be really clear. So we reviewed, I think it was something on the order of 50 either peer-reviewed studies about the connections of, about the social conditions where safety thrives, or best practices for police and their connections to decreased community violence or decreased police use of force or whatever the positive outcome is. And from those, on that foundation of studies from around the nation, then we're able to analyze what's going on in Brooklyn Park. And so from a foundation of these are the social conditions for public safety, what does Brooklyn Park data tell us about where those conditions are present and where they're not? That's that aspect of like root conditions, root causes of violence in Brooklyn Park. It's studies from around the nation and for that aspect of it around the world to inform what do we need to look at in order to understand what's going on in Brooklyn Park. And then we looked at it. And we have, I think it's probably 30 pages of results and reports in the report at this point. And then as far as policing best practices, we're looking at national, like studies from around the nation, from police departments around the nation that are connecting police practices with decreased police use of force, with increased community trust, with improved accountability or whatever it is. And one of the things that's pretty obvious in the research once you start digging into it is that there's not a lot of places where policing practices are connected in the research with these desirable outcomes. But where they are, then we looked at, okay, what's the situation in Brooklyn Park and what can we find out? And that's what I was trying to present when I was talking about consent-based searches and officer identification and things like that. So standing on a foundation of what we know about policing best practices, what's the situation in Brooklyn Park? So that's kind of how that research applies. And hopefully I've explained myself a little better, maybe the second or third time around. But thanks for your patience. I stumbled through it the first time.
Thank you for that, Lindsay.
So we have Mohammed. You have a comment, a question?
Hassanin, are you there? I think your hand's up, right?
Mohammed, are you on mute?
I think it's Hassanan.
Yeah, sorry.
Yeah. If you're speaking, you're on mute, Hassanin.
We can go to Yolanda, also have her hands raised.
Hi. I do understand how looking at data from different areas work when you're trying to get a basis to understand what's going on. But talking to 50 people is not enough when you've got a city of a plus 70,000 people with different situations, different economic structures, different ideas, that is basically throwing a needle in 10,000 haystacks. It doesn't pull enough information to really find out how that national data sits with the public right now. And I think that's where a lot of the disconnect is. It's not talking to people at all. It's not talking to enough people. Believe me, a lot of people need to be heard. And that's where the disconnect is. People feel like their needs and concerns aren't being addressed because nobody is taking the time to actually sit down and hear the good and the dirty with it.
Thank you for saying that. And I think one thing that we should have probably highlighted is the way that the 50 people were selected. And we did look for people in a way that had experience with police. So we selected people based on the way that we wanted to hear from people who we thought might not be the most heard based on what we know from our advisory group and other things like the research and the literature. And so it wasn't just anyone who wanted to talk or the first 50 people. It went through a much more extensive process. And given the short amount of time that we had today, we didn't clarify that. A lot of the things that we're talking about right now too are in this report, which I know it's that egg before chicken kind of thing, but we hope that some of this is clarified, and also the questions that you're giving us will let us know if they aren't, that we can clarify some of this a little bit better. But I did just want to mention, we did think about that, Yolanda, with the advisory group and tried to make sure the people that we were able to talk to were not just the first 50 or, we looked at different neighborhoods, we looked at race, we looked at age, we looked at experience, most recent experience with the police, and that those variables were some that we looked into before we even asked somebody to be part of the interview.
Thank you. Hassanan, are you available now? Okay, we'll move on to Henry.
My hand thing don't work, but I would love to say something.
Let me get to Henry first. He had his hands raised first.
Hello.
Hi, Henry.
Hi, thank you for the opportunity. Just in furtherance of Yolanda's question, the level of diversity when it comes to those who were selected in this sample of 50 persons is very key. So also, and I would like to look at that. And are there plans for similar processes to be carried out in adjacent cities? Because if you want to see a bigger picture of how our police department is performing, they have to be compared to other police departments within, like Brooklyn Center and Maple Grove and Crystal, what have you. Is there any way in which we're planning to carry out such a process? Because we want to, I might be partial in my decision, but I think on the average, as compared to other adjacent cities, I think our Brooklyn Park department is doing an exceptionally good job as compared to other cities. But when it comes to Brooklyn Park specific things, there could be some differences. But I have seen interactions with police from other departments, and I can say hats off to Brooklyn Park Police Department. So are there plans to carry out similar processes, to work with the other cities to carry out similar processes, because we are adjacent cities. Somebody can run away from Brooklyn Park and go to Brooklyn Center as a city of refuge, and all of a sudden you see them coming back, and perpetrating crimes here again. So if you want to solve the problem, it's good to solve it holistically, and part of it being solved holistically is to work with these other police departments to ensure that similar practices that we're trying to carry out in Brooklyn Park are also carried on in those adjacent cities. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you for that comments and question, Henry. Would anybody like to address the issue of comparing Brooklyn Park to surrounding cities and areas? Oh, yeah. Sorry, we'll take that one first. And I just want to say sorry, Mohammed, for the technical difficulties. I mean, Hassan.
And we have someone on the phone that would like to comment or ask a question as well.
That would be me. Hopefully my name shows up. But just the gentleman just spoke just a few minutes ago. I guess I'm confused as to spending $50,000 on this survey with 50 people when those funds could have been put into working with youth within our community. And I myself think the same thing as the gentleman before. Our police department does a phenomenal job engaging in our community, getting out there, talking to the community all over in different portions of our city and bringing people together. So I guess I really have an issue with spending $50,000 this way. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks for that comment. Appreciate your thoughts. I wanted to circle back to the question around connecting and comparing ourselves with surrounding cities. And maybe as a prompt, there were some comments earlier around what Brooklyn Center had passed, earlier in the chat. So, maybe Woki, if you're there, and or Deputy Chief Bruley, if you have some thoughts in terms of, what the differences may be, what it might look like moving forward.
Thank you, XP. With regards to potentially a comparable study with adjacent cities, I would say that sounds like it would be a great idea, to know what's really taking place around policing in our region and with our neighbors. However, just for the scope of what Brooklyn Park can control, I'm not certain that our city council would have any purview really over what the policies, practices, and procedures of adjacent cities. It may be interesting to look at, to compare against the practices. However, I'm not certain that would be something that we could really justify as, for the taxpayers of Brooklyn Park to do that research into other cities. And that's my initial thought, but that's definitely something that is an idea that could be brought forth to the city council.
Okay, looks like Hassanin, are you able to unmute yourself?
How about now?
All right,
Yes.
There you are.
Yeah. Well, it's great to see you guys. I don't know. XP, can you hear me?
Yes,
Yeah?
I can hear you.
Okay, good. So I was listening to the research done, and I know a lot of people had questions about the number you use, 50. I know that we're looking for a number on this survey that's a sample, of each side, and there's no way you can get a survey of 55,000 homes in Brooklyn Park. What I usually tell people is this is the first step. This opens up a door to discussion, both from the community level on the needs and on the police department side on what needs to be done. But the biggest part that we need to look at is the implementation of what we really want to do. That is what a lot of people are interested in. From people that I talked to when I told them, hey, join this call tonight, you can find out what the research says about it. They're not interested. They're tired of talking, tired of seeing the conversation all around the country. And people are polarized on both sides. Some think that if you talk about police department, you're thinking about defunding, and some ideas about defunding comes out different for different people, depending on how they understand the concept of what people are talking about. And even some people themselves, some of them, they do not know what it means, and they take it to the extreme, either on both sides, and what wasn't meant for it to be. But for Brooklyn Park, I can tell you this: I still have faith in the community. I still have faith in the city and the police department. This is from somebody who has had experience with the police department, and trying to see if we can fill in that gap of that relationship between the communities that feel targeted versus the police department that doesn't feel respected. Good example is today where, the police went out to a certain neighborhood and they were met with residents who were aggressive towards them while they're doing their work. So in our community, we do need some kind of balanced approach, both from the community side and the police department. And this will be something that we need to be cognizant about, that people who might be on the polarized ends on both sides might not be in this conversation. But they should be heard. Everybody should be heard. That's what we want to do, is we want to make sure we take everybody and we're moving in together as the community, and I look at this as the first step. I don't care if we spend 50,000 or 100,000, but it's a first step. It brings out the conversation. It puts facts on the table that people will look at. It will put vision on the table that we can move on from it. So I'm happy to see this coming out. I want to see if there's going to be any changes on the 17th of July when you guys present it to the City Council. I want to see what the City Council think about it. I want to hear. Deputy Chief Mark Bruley is a good friend of mine. If he has any reservation, I want to hear it from him. I want to hear what the police department thinks about it. I want to hear what the council think about it on their side. And most definitely what the community thinks about this as well. Thank you.
Thank you, Hassan. Well, we've kind of covered the third question. What do you think the city council should keep in mind? There's a lot of good conversation there, so we can kind of move it towards question number 4. What do you hope will result from this project? So kind of that results that you'd like to see. And I see Sasha D's hand is up. So Sasha, what are your thoughts?
Thank you. Can you hear me okay?
Yes.
Excellent. So I think, as I'm sitting back, first of all, thank you for all the research. I think everyone's commenting on the 50 people in this case. I mean, it's a small swath, but it's a step forward, just like Hassan said. I really hope what comes out of this is that, we're seeing violent crimes go up and up, right? And we're continuing to fund the police more and more. I have property tax information to prove it. So I think this should all just cause us to open our eyes and actually start holding our police accountable, guys. I mean, listen, I feel safe in the community, but I'm a white woman. I have security, sure, and I recognize that privilege. It's not a problem to ask for transparency of our police and ask these questions. We pay them. We want them to protect us. But if violent crimes continue to go up and police aren't necessarily preventing this, we have to talk about prevention, right? So I think my call to action is I want to be more present at our city council meetings, ask these questions, and ask the police what their plan is moving forward. And I hope the team here joins and plays more of an active role in the community to ask those questions. But again, thank you all there. That's my comments for today.
Thank you. I did see a one hand earlier. Looks like that person has lowered their hand. Any other comments in terms of what do you hope will result from this project?
It looks like Carol LaFleur has a verbal hand up.
Sorry, my hand's not working. I know Hasnan extremely well, so I mean, it's not that I totally disagree with him, but what I do say is, what do I want to see future? I mean, I want to see us investing dollars into programs with youth continually. That's important. But why are we not looking at the aspect of having like community navigators within our police department from the very diverse population we have in this city? So we have, like, from our Somali population, from our Liberian population, all the different populations, a navigator that's specifically in the police department that works together with them and goes out to events and are able to work together with the community that way. I think that would bring more communication and work better if we had something like that. They do it in Minneapolis. Why wouldn't we do it here? Just a suggestion.
Thank you. I see her. She's back. I see you, Councilmember Morrison, waving your hand. One moment. Let me get to Cynical from Candlewood.
Hi, can you hear me?
Yes.
Hi, good evening. First of all, I wanted to say thank you, and we love our city. I actually was one of the 50 people. I'll put myself out there. I was one of those 50 people that got talked to, and I don't know what people mean by some of those people were the underrepresented people, or they feel that the right people didn't get talked to. I did see a lot of information on Facebook, a lot of information on the city website. So I think that it was really nice that a lot of us got reached out to. The point is, did we reach back? Our police department does a great job as far as I'm concerned on engaging with us. I'm not saying that it couldn't be better. The point is, we think that they don't engage with us enough, but what are we looking for them to do better? What are we looking for them to engage, with us on, and to get out there? I think Hasnan said it very well. I'm one of those people that are kind of on both sides. I am an African-American woman, but I am also somebody who's been in the police department or law enforcement or seeing it on the other side very well. And it is hard to be trapped in the middle of this battle where if you, somebody says defund the police, they think you want to rip their guns off of them. No, they got to do their jobs. We need them out there doing their jobs. We need them to feel supported doing their job, because who else are you supposed to call when you actually need somebody to show up? But it is a good idea to have maybe civilians, qualified civilians, kind of being in the middle of some of that, breaking down that barrier to say, okay, you might not need a police officer for this moment, but you're going to need somebody. And sometimes those mental health professionals, they're not available at 2 a.m. They're not going to come a-running like the officers come a-running every single time you call. So it's gonna, obviously we're gonna have to do some more focusing on what we need, because they can't be the one and all. They can't be the superhero. They can't come get your cat out of the tree and also, stop the murderer and the robber. They have a lot on their plate to deal with. And I'm not saying that they're great at everything. They're human. And I think we forget that they're human, and so are we. And we got to kind of get to learn and know each other. But I would kind of hope to get out of some of this that we're all in this together. We are in this together. Take off the uniforms, take off the color of the skin, take off everything. And we're all going to have to be in this together. And as residents of Brooklyn Park, we should be hyped and ready to be all in, all the time, all together, period. And that's all I really have to say. Thank you.
Thank you, Senator. Councilmember Morrison, if you could hold on just one moment. Let me squeeze in Aja King.
Yeah, it's actually Asia King.
Asia.
Yeah, but this is Dr. Asia King, and I am chair for the Human Rights Commission for Brooklyn Park, and also in close relationship with the police department as we are taking on its work. We came last week and gave a mini report to the Human Rights Commission, which was amazing. I think that this is a great start for us to get ideas in how we re-envision safety. And as I've heard other people say, no, it is not all on the police, but it's not one piece over the other. It is absolutely having our police department figure out how to engage our community. You know, to protect and serve is, you know, not just patrolling. And trust me, I love the work that our Brooklyn Park police are doing, because they are absolutely trying to empower us as a community. But I also feel that they need to focus on figuring out how to get that engagement piece. And, you know, Chief will tell you that a lot of his guys are overworked. There's a lot of trauma that they are facing. And we're facing that same trauma too, but they're sharing it in a very different way. So that's one tier. When we're helping to really reimagine policing, it's not about taking them off the streets, because we absolutely do need them, but we want to be able to support them as well. And that's why the other piece of this comes in with the community to coming together. So right now, one of the projects that the Human Rights Commission is taking on or has backed is the project on 63rd and Zane, which has been very problematic over the past couple of years. But one thing that we're figuring out now, and Wilder has really been distinctive about pointing these points of safety within our city, is about the community engagement piece. And so we really, as a community, have to decide how are we going to show up, because Chief and his team are doing what they can, but it is up to us to really fill in those gaps. And so that means we have to create programming or get people to the resources for programming. We have to engage these areas that we find problematic. We have to take back our community. So I can put in the chat how you can get in touch with me if you are interested in being a part of the solution, because we are actively in this right now, especially if you're familiar with the program of 21 Days of Peace. That's happening right now, and we need all hands on deck. So the Wilder Foundation, thank you so much for the work that you've done. And as a community, if you are interested in getting your hands in it and really being a part of the work that you want to see, I will leave my contact information so that you can get active as well. Thank you so much.
Thank you for that, Dr. King. We'll get Councilmember Morrison, and then we will have, while we're listening to Councilmember Morrison, we'll also have the evaluation for tonight's session in the chat so that you can take a minute to fill that out and then come back for some next steps. Councilmember Morrison.
Councilmember, you're muted.
Thank you very much. First of all, I want to apologize for my tardiness, but I'm in Arizona right now, and my mother-in-law is very, very, very ill, and so I come here to help her. So we had a situation today that we had to take care of regarding her, and so I'm at this moment on the line as tardy as I am, but I want to lend my voice, if I possibly can, to the work that's being implemented and that I've been a part of since the beginning of it. First of all, I heard brief conversations. Let me say that as well. Let me also clearly say this. When this program went forward, I was not on city council at the time. However, I had some questions about all of the information that was requested of Wilder to do research. I didn't think it was adequate enough. I thought we could put some more in it and those type of things as I expressed that to them. However, please understand this. What Wilder Research and our subcommittees had engaged in and done and brought back for us to review and listen and hear the outcome of, it was what council directed them to do. So the information was directed by council. Wilder performed that particular research to make those things happen, and the outcome is what the outcome is going to be. I hear people speak about the police and speak about our community. Number one thing that I think we need to focus on is that this is a community effort. Our police needs us just as well as we need our police. The outcome of this results that Wilder has diligently put forward together that I think will provide us with some insight at how we can begin to take steps to move forward and make it Brooklyn Park, as well as our Brooklyn Park Police, a better place to be. We need to be open to listening to what's going on and begin to move forward, take steps in moving forward and engage in those processes already. Community policing means simply community and policing working together hand in hand to give us a safer place that we all can be proud of and safe of. You know, no one should feel in fear of going down to 63rd and Zane at night because that's still part of Brooklyn Park. So we cannot abandon those areas by not putting resources in those areas that would make 63rd and Zane just as appealing and or frequented to service, which they have been diligently doing. And when we call 911 or call them, these brave men and women are running to come to our call and our need to jump in harm's way, regardless of what it is. Also, please understand that 99% of the police calls is after the fact that something done happened. They can't prevent these things from happening with somebody getting into a domestic dispute with somebody or somebody breaking into somebody's house. They're not there before these things happen. They're there after the fact. So we have to keep in mind that they're there after the situation done occurred. And now what we have to focus on is, from that point, is how things are handled after they are there and engaging in that particular situation and circumstances. Those things are vitally important on how the situation is handled, how we begin to move forward, how we as community can step up to take back our community, as Dr. King has mentioned. Those things are all part of community engagement. You know, I think it's very important, again, that this research that Wilder is providing to us today, that we take notice to it, and not just take notice, but we act upon it. If they give us a laundry list of information on what they discovered, now it's up to council to do something about it. And I'm part of council. And if we do nothing about it, then you can't blame the research. You got to blame the people that's not doing anything. We have to take action. And I'm saying we, not just council, but I'm employing each and everybody that's here on this video and the other thousands of people in our residents in our community that's part of our community that makes up Brooklyn Park. We have to begin to engage one another to make this community safe for each and every person within our community, to feel safe in our community. And taking back that community is some things as Dr. King was sharing with you about the HRC is bringing forward in 63rd and Zane area. We have to let those people know in that community that they are special too. They are just as a Brooklyn Parker as anybody else. Working with the police, I think, is a vital thing that we need to do here in our community. I think the police are doing a really good job. Do I think they can do a better job? Yes. Do I think any other police department can do a better job? Yes. So our situation is not just unique to Brooklyn Park. So don't bash our police department. Let's help our Brooklyn Park Police Department become a better police department and help Brooklyn Park become a better city for us all. So I just wanted to add my voice to that and say that I'm excited about Wilder's research and information that comes in as a result of that. Again, I apologize for jumping in late, but I'm here taking care of my mother-in-law. And again, I apologize, but I just want to lend my voice to that to say this is a community effort, and it's going to take each and every one of us that lives in this community to bring forward the vision of a community that we all want to see and realize and live in. It's going to take all of us, the you, the me, the we, the us, our families, our friends, their family, and their friends in our community. So again, thank you very much. I just wanted to lend my voice to that and say thank you guys very much.
Thank you, Councilmember Morrison, for those thoughts. Let me just say, for those of you on the phone, please feel free to reach out to our community engagement staff. Let them know your thoughts. Shoot them an email about tonight's. You don't have the link to the eval, but please reach out and share your thoughts. About the call, but also just about the subject matter, right? The committee, the work, the scorecard, and what you think. With that, let me move on to Councilmember Pa. She's got her hand up as well.
Thank you, XP, for that. I just want to share with all of you how much I appreciate everyone spending their time with us tonight and sharing your ideas, thoughts, and questions with us. And I want to assure everyone that this research that we finished, it's going to be looked at, but I want to assure that it's not the only thing we're looking at when we make decision about how to move forward. It's one piece of the many community engagement that we've already done and that we will continue to do when it comes to this issue and concern. And so I just want to assure those who are saying, 50 is not enough of a representation. It isn't, and it's not going to be the only representation when we talk about these issues. So I just want to put that out there. But again, my appreciation to everyone for tonight, and let you know that all of us on here have been listening to your comments. We've written them down. These are the things we're going to be talking about moving forward as we continue to work with all of you and our partners on these issues. Thank you.
Thank you, Councilmember Pa. I think that's it. Thank you, everyone, for your comments, for your wonderful contributions to this conversation tonight, and for all that you do in our community. Kathy, do you have any other thoughts? Otherwise, we can throw it back to Claudia.
Oh, thanks everyone. Great discussion. I appreciate all your feedback. So, Claudia.
Thank you so much, Kathy and XP, for your guidance in the facilitation of those questions this evening. The next steps I put in the chat, but they are July 12th City Council meeting, when Wilder will present to the City Council, and the final report will be available on the city's website. And I just want to thank everyone for coming tonight, especially to the presenters and you all residents that have taken time out of your evening to join us this evening. And for Lindsay and Julie from Wilder for the great report that they gave us this evening. Again, everyone, have a lovely night. Thank you for being here.
Thanks, everyone.